I have assembled those men and women willing to fight for that peace, to defend a world that fears and hates them. To that end, I, Professor Charles Xavier, assembled the X-Men.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel will know that recently I've been reviewing several X-Men fighting games. In my last two reviews I looked at X-Men Mutant Academy 1 and 2 for the PS1. Prior to that I reviewed X-Men Children of the Atom, which is an arcade title that was later ported onto the PS1. Today we're going to be looking at the third and final game in the Mutant Academy series, and the first to appear on the 6th generation of consoles. X-Men Next Dimension, released in 2002, once again developed by Midway Studios. This is going to be for the original Xbox version, which is the only version I own. So those of you who saw my review for Mutant Academy 2 will know that it's my personal favourite game in the Academy series, and it's actually the first X-Men game I ever owned. Needless to say, when this game came out, and I first found out about it, I was beyond hyped. Sadly though, this is a game that ever since I first played it, I've always had mixed feelings on. And I remember being extremely disappointed with it back in the day for a number of reasons. Just like the previous games, the game is a one-on-one fighting game, similar to the likes of Street Fighter or Dead or Alive. Unlike the previous games, this one actually has a story, albeit a very simple one. Like most fighting games, the story basically serves as a series of excuses to pit various characters from the roster against one another. It involves the Prime Sentinel attempting to retrieve the head of their leader Bastion, who is imprisoned by S.H.I.E.L.D. Upon escaping, Bastion hatches a plan to turn the Brotherhood and the X-Men against each other, using this as a distraction to cover up his real plan, which is to kidnap the X-Man Forge. Forge has the mutant power to create any kind of machine, and Bastion wants to use this power to wipe out all of mutant kind. The game takes place across various popular locations from the X-Men series, such as the X-Mansion, the Danger Room, the Savage Land, and even Asteroid M, as well as several others. Most of the story involves the X-Men battling the Brotherhood in various one-on-one battles, while Bastion works to take out both sides. As I said before, it's a simple plot and there really isn't much to it, but I appreciate its inclusion nonetheless. At various points in the story, you take control of members of the X-Men, and others you take control of members of the Brotherhood. In addition to these characters, you also fight various kinds of Sentinels who show up from time to time, as well as the main villain of the game, Bastion, who you fight several times with several different characters. The finale of the game is actually quite cool, and there are plenty of cutscenes in between to convey the story.
X-Men, we're under attack.
At certain points you will get to choose from a list of characters. At others, the character you play as will be predetermined. There are actually a surprising amount of cutscenes in the game, and these look great for the most part. So that pretty much sums up the story mode. Now let's talk about the gameplay, as well as the game's overall style and technicalities. You once again get a useful tutorial which can help you familiarise yourself with the controls and combat of the game, as well as a way to learn each character's moves and powers. One of the first things you will notice about this game on a positive note is that the game looks great for an early Xbox title. The backgrounds and animations look great, and the character models look fantastic. They really nailed the whole X-Men aesthetic. You may notice that a lot of the game's music is reused directly from the previous Mutant Academy games, adding some familiarity to the game. And I don't really have any criticisms in regards to the game's style and atmosphere. The battle arenas are much better this time. with multiple stage arenas. You can often send enemies flying into a new area like a lot of modern fighting games, and some of the animations during battles look really good. The game's new 3D environments look fantastic too, and it makes battles seem so much more dynamic, and so much less predictable. I really do like the way the game looks, and it really helps with immersion. Now it's time to talk about the actual gameplay, because sadly this is where the game starts to fall apart. And let me be as blunt and as direct as possible here. This game is a pain in the ass. Before I get to my criticisms of the game, of which there are several, a quick breakdown of what the game has to offer. So you of course have a bunch of playable characters, each with their own fighting styles, punches, kicks, as well as superpowers. And this is all well and good, with some aspects of it being really well done. Each character's super moves are once again fantastic and badass.
Heart is what wins battles.
However, despite all this, as I mentioned before, the game is a pain in the ass. First of all, the difficulty. Now, long-time subscribers of mine will know, I'm no stranger to difficulty in games, even fighting games like this. I mean, I'm a veteran of several classic 90s platformers, so I expect a challenge in games. But this game is so hard. The AI is so brutal that it just feels flat out unfair, and if truth be told, it just isn't that fun. I was able to complete it, don't get me wrong, but I felt like I had basically exploited my way through each battle, using trial and error, rather than one based on skill and tactics. For me, it really soured the experience when playing through the story. Again, it's not impossible, I was able to do it, but it was a chore to do. And that's not even the worst part about it. The biggest problem I had with the game is the fact that the game is so slow. I mean, fighting games are generally known for their fast-paced, flashy gameplay, pulling off visually impressive combinations with blinding speed, and generally having fun, but in this game, the characters move so slow that it actually feels as if you're playing in slow motion. This isn't just a visual problem either, it makes pulling off moves and combinations a complete chore as well, since when playing against the AI, you spend so long getting into position that by the time you get there, the AI has already struck you. The gameplay is just way too slow and clunky for a fighting game. This is particularly bad when playing as one of the larger, more brutish characters such as Juggernaut or Blob. Seriously, playing this game as Juggernaut, I literally felt like I was playing in slow motion, constantly spamming buttons just to get near my opponent, and try to get something done. It's really frustrating.
This sucks!
It's such a shame because the game has such a great roster, great battle arenas, great costumes, and a great visual style and aesthetic. It's one of the best looking fighting games of the time, but the actual gameplay itself is so bad and so flawed that it ruins the experience for me. I don't understand how Mutant Academy 1 and 2 could have been so great and had such fast flowing gameplay with excellent combat, only for this game to be so stiff and clunky. Maybe it had something to do with the next generation hardware, not being able to handle it, but I don't think that's the case, since Dead or Alive 3 came out a year before this, and that game is extremely fast paced, with no issues with controls and movement whatsoever. So yeah, despite the great roster, and all the great features the game has to offer, the overall gameplay is a massive disappointment in my personal opinion. Speaking of the game's roster, you have several characters from the X-Men, and several from the Brotherhood, as well as some Sentinel characters. You also have some unlockable characters. From the X-Men you have Cyclops, Wolverine, Beast, Gambit, Rogue, Phoenix, Storm, Bishop, Betsy, Forge, Nightcrawler, and Havoc. From the Brotherhood you have Magneto, Mystique, Toad, Sabretooth, and even Blob.
Thanks, that made me work up my appetite.
Yeah, playing as Blob in a fighting game for the first time was some experience. I really enjoyed it. You also have Lady Deathstrike, who is a badass. You have Psylocke, who is basically a reskinned version of Betsy. You also have Dark Phoenix, who is basically a reskinned version of Phoenix. Some different kinds of Sentinels, including Bastion, who is the main villain of the game. And also, exclusively to the Xbox version, you can also unlock Pyro, who was one of my personal favourite X-Men characters as a kid. Aside from the story mode, you have pretty much the same modes from the previous games in the series. You once again have the arcade mode, where you choose a character from the roster and fight through a lineup of other characters in one-on-one battles. This is once again pretty much ruined by the slow, clunky gameplay, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. Once again, you also have a 2-player versus mode, which is pretty standard for fighting games, where you and a friend can play against each other. It's a feature that we pretty much come to expect from fighting games, and yeah, this has it. You also have a survival mode, where you see how many battles you can win and how long you can last. The game also has several pretty interesting unlockable features. First of all, you have a whole bunch of unlockable costumes for each character. Some of these are based on the comics, others are actually based on the movies. This gives you an incentive to persist through the game to try and unlock these. The game also has a gallery with a bunch of viewable features. You can replay the game's cutscenes here. You also get a short profile for each of the game's playable characters. Some of these are even narrated by Patrick Stewart, who reprises his role as Professor Charles Xavier in this game.
Blob. The school children used to tease Fred Dukes for his enormous size, and he hated them for it. As the Blob, he is now both irresistible force and immovable object, and he has pledged that no one will laugh at him ever again. Pyro. St. John Allardyce initially used his powers to manipulate flame for crime more out of boredom than any true predilection towards evil. The life appealed to him, and so St. John chose to remain a criminal. All choices, however, are not without consequence. As Pyro now suffers the ravages of the legacy virus, no one is more aware of this truism than he.
These are quite fun to listen to. The voice acting in the game is pretty good for the most part. And once again, each character gets their own one-liners.
Your technique lacks a sense of style.
So all in all, I'm pretty conflicted with this game. On the one hand, it's a great looking game with a great visual style and aesthetic. It has a fairly interesting story mode and all the features you would expect from a fighting game of the time. And taking all that into consideration, you would come to the conclusion that this game is definitely worth playing, and could even be considered better than its predecessors. Unfortunately though, this game misses the mark big time due to its combat and gameplay. If truth be told, it's just boring and tedious to get through. And it's nowhere near as fun or as fluid as the previous games in the Mutant Academy series. Seriously, Mutant Academy 2 was an absolute blast to play despite the challenge. But this game, in addition to its absolutely brutal and flat out unfair difficulty, as well as its slow, tedious and clunky gameplay, with some of the larger characters moving slow as molasses and barely being able to get near their opponent to do any damage before taking damage themselves, and it just generally drags out the game. I wouldn't recommend this one, but I suppose if you are an X-Men fan and you do appreciate the roster and the bonus features, then you could probably add this to your collection. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts on X-Men Next Dimension, and for the time being that concludes my X-Men fighting games reviews. I will be returning to the X-Men series in the near future, since I do have several more X-Men games to play and review, so stay tuned for those. I give X-Men Next Dimension a very generous 5 out of 10. It's not a game that I would recommend over most other fighting games, but if you are a die-hard X-Men fan, then you can get the game pretty cheap now. It isn't that expensive to buy even all these years later. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed checking out these X-Men fighting games. Let me know what you guys think, stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.